welcome to Daily Dose Radio, a 5-minute devotional podcast studying the Psalms verse by verse, broadcast from the ever-beautiful Sharonville, Ohio, on the sunny side of Cincinnati. Hey there, friends, you found it. This is Daily Dose Radio here in the Bible Bistro. I'm so glad that you have discovered us today. We are studying the Psalms verse by verse, 5 minutes a day, 5 days a week, studying the Psalms verse by verse. That's my little elevator speech, and that kind of describes everything we do here. This is the second trip through the Psalms. We made our first trip beginning in March of 2013, and we are in we're in the home stretch of our second trip through the Psalms. It takes us about 4 years, and we're in Psalm 119. So if you have your Bible, I hope you'll join me today in Psalm 119. And all this week, we're going to be looking at the Ayin section, which begins in verse 121 and ends in verse 128. And this section I have entitled The Servant Letter. And that's because the letter Ayin is the first letter in the Hebrew word that we translate into English as servant. And so, of course, the psalmist is going to use that to his advantage, and he has servant showing up here in the psalm, in this particular section, 3 different times. Also, the word work shows up here, which is another one of those words that begins with this particular letter. Remember that Psalm 119 is an acrostic, and each section, beginning with the letter of the Hebrew alphabet that it represents, we have 8 verses, and all of those 8 verses begin with that letter, whatever that letter is, of the alphabet that it's following. And so we have the servant letter being used here quite a bit. And so if you imagine that this is the servant letter and this section is focused on the servant, what would you think a servant might write? You're the servant, and you're writing a letter, and you're going to write that letter to who? Maybe you're writing a letter to your family. Maybe you're writing a letter to a business partner or another servant. Perhaps you're writing your letter to your master. Well, that's exactly who this letter is to. It's to the master from the servant. So there's a lot of prayer in here. I say all that to say there's a lot of prayer in this particular section of Psalm 119. He's asking lots of things. And we see lots of themes that we've had before. We see the theme of covenant with love and hate in this section. We see the theme of prayer, and he's asking for prayer against his oppressor, the proud, and those folks that are against him. We've seen that before in Psalm 119. We've seen of course, here in this section, we see the 10 words. Not all 10 of them show up here, but we see many of the 10 words: judgment, the word, statutes, precepts, commandments. All of them are found here. Testimonies is found here as well. So lots of commonalities that we've had all the way through. We have them again here. But here we have, each section has its own characteristic. And so we find that here in this particular section as well. 121 through 128. And today we're just going to read verse 121. I have done judgment and justice. Leave me not to my oppressors. Now, you read that verse and you think, oh, this is the voice of a servant, because you can just hear him or feel him standing before his master, and perhaps he's making this request. Look, this is how I've acted. This is how they've acted. So he's asking for judgment from the master. I've done judgment and justice, he says. They, my oppressors, not doing that. Don't leave me to them. So we have this prayer right out of the gate. We can see ourselves standing before the throne of the master, or the seat, or in the home, wherever the master might be. And the servant is making his request. Don't leave me to mine oppressors. We'll talk about more tomorrow about the oppressor, who that is, and I hope you'll join me then on Daily Dose Radio. Thanks for listening to Daily Dose Radio. I'm David Smith. The music today has been performed by the Bluegrass Experiment. Thanks again for listening. I'll see you next time on Daily Dose Radio.